Hey everyone, this is Prashant chiming in again for another lesson. We're going to be talking about privacy today. In my personal opinion, privacy is a human right and it has different connotations for each and every human being who relates with it at whatever point in time. This is Prashant Khanna. We are doing the Info 814 Security and Forensics course at Wintech. In this session, we shall be looking at a brief introduction to privacy. What is the concept? Why do we study privacy? What are the major reasons and what are the challenges that are there for coherent development of privacy laws? We should then look at a couple of definitions. We'll also jump on to some common privacy tenets. We look at what information asset protection means because we're dealing with security and specifically with information security. We'll try and understand what does data ownership actually mean. Uh, it's an abstract concept which has gained a lot of traction in recent times. We shall try and understand what this means. We'll then again look at some regulations and global privacy laws that have been the flavor of every country. And finally, we look at what is data reminiscence. Now, it's a fairly long kind of a session that we may have, so I'll break it up into a couple of parts. We will have a few exercises in the interim, and I'll have a separate video created and posted on Moodle for that. So hang on, it's going to be interesting, right? Whenever any of you feel that, well, it's time to have a break, just let me know and we'll jump onto the break. Privacy. What does it mean? Now, privacy, as the definition says, this is as per the classical definition provided in legal tenets, is privacy is the right of a human being to control the manner and extent to which information about him or her is distributed. However, the word privacy means different things to different people. It could be a right to be left alone, a right to control who sees information about you, or a right to make decision about your personal life without external intervention. It could be government, it could be a company, basically without any external intervention. To some, uh, I mean, the definition becomes a little more difficult again because the value of a right to privacy can vary depending upon circumstances, cultural context, time, and perhaps personal preferences. A case in point is today, and we'll discuss that when maybe there is a huge medical urgency, and we discussed that in a previous class. If there was a medical emergency, how many of us are going to actually be um, holding on to the so-called privacy norms against giving up our information and letting people be aware how things could change for us so drastically in such a short time. So people in one country may have a different view from those in another country about whether the government or external agency should collect information about citizens. Or we may find it acceptable for media to publish intimate information about criminals or politicians or maybe your favorite film star, but we may criticize them when they print photographs of ordinary people that we find intrusive. So the connotation of privacy is different for every individual. Also, our grandparents probably had a different view of privacy than we do, and our children will have a very different view from us. So privacy is not something that is absolute. It will change. It has been changing with times. It will change with times. I remember very distinctly 15, 20 years ago, it was kind of unheard of if I was to speak on a social channel in which there were about 100 other friends and I'm talking about, hey, I had a bad day with my parent, or I had a bad day with my spouse, or I had a bad day with my wife. But today it's so common. So norms of privacy change with time. I may even have a different view from my neighbor on what information I'm prepared to share with others. Now, the level of privacy is another thing that we need to be aware of when we're dealing with this concept. Now, all these different challenges, there are difference in our appreciation of what privacy means. they create a very big challenge for development of coherent privacy laws. Now, privacy mandates take all form. It could be contractual. Let's say the example of PCI DSS, the credit card uh, standard. It could be regulatory, which means that you could have laws within a country that say that, well, you can share X and you cannot share Y. And then there could be something which are customary, like industry standards, like ISO. They can define a standard for what exactly does it mean by having privacy inbuilt within a social platform. Right? So we've got a brief introduction to privacy as such, but we need to understand, why do we need privacy? Now, despite despite the difficulties in understanding or coming to a common definition of privacy over the last thousands of years, a common understanding about privacy, however, has emerged in some mature societies. Say, for example, New Zealand and other such countries. Our laws reflect this common understanding. Now, what does privacy actually give us? It provides people the need to be able to protect information about themselves. And people need the opportunity to withdraw physically or mentally from society. So these two basic tenets, if they are available, then we can say in some measure that privacy has been guaranteed. Now, privacy as defined by this common understanding is important because it ensures that we feel secure. For instance, we become tense when we are constantly under scrutiny. Now, let's say I make a small, breakout session for you, and I tell you, hey, go ahead, go have a nice, chat about a topic, and then I suddenly jump in there. How do you feel about it? Maybe not very comfortable, right? So if you're under constant scrutiny, you are going to be a little aware of your restrictions. So that in turn impinges upon your privacy. We also often define our relationship with people by what information we choose to share with them. So if we are unable to control who knows information about us, we will feel insecure, at least in part, because the boundaries of our relationship become uncertain. Now that's a very important aspect of privacy. Human beings need security to be able to function normally in their social environment, and thus privacy is an essential part. So privacy, which supports or creates feeling of security, is an important human right. If we feel secure, we are more likely to play a fuller part in the society. However, although privacy is important, please remember it is not absolute. Only important social interest can be more important than privacy in particular circumstances. I'll repeat that part. Other important social interest can be more important than privacy in particular circumstances. All privacy laws that have ever been made in any country make allowance for other social interests, such as preventing crime, ensuring safety, also ensuring that courts get information to make their decisions. Now, the fundamental reason or the fundamental tenet of all that we have discussed in the last 10 minutes is that privacy is an essential requirement. Human beings can't really work without having the basics of privacy in place in either a workplace or in a relationship. Having said that, we will now move on to what is it that we are trying to protect. That thing is called an asset. Asset. An item deemed to be valuable can be referred to as an asset. In other words, an asset is anything that has value to an organization or to an individual. In many cases, assets are also referred to as resources. Both words, assets and resources, imply value to an organization or an individual, and therefore must be protected based on the value that it represents to the organizations. Now, these values can be expressed in terms of quantitative or qualitative methodologies. And both these valuation methods are used to determine the level of protection that the asset requires. If the value of an asset is, say, 100 rupees or $100, would you perhaps invest $10,000 in protecting it, or protecting the value of it, or risking, if you're putting controls in place so that it is not under risk? Maybe not. Now, qualitative assets valuation implies that the value is expressed in terms of numbers, usually monetary values. It is often understood that expressing values of intangible assets, such as information, is very difficult and many cases impossible to express in quantitative ways. Therefore, value of intangible assets is usually expressed in terms of qualitative methodologies, usually using grades such as high, medium, low, or other classification that can be expressed by the value without using numbers. Understanding the actual value of assets becomes very important in understanding how to protect those assets, because the value will always dictate the level of security required. It is important for us to understand that security is not always driven by risk, but rather driven by value. In fact, if you think about it, what is risk anyway? Risk is something that can impact value, and therefore to fully understand risk requires the full understanding of the value of the asset first. If you know the value of an asset, you will then be able to appreciate the risk to it and put correct control measures to prevent that risk from becoming an issue.